All right, we're back. Wasn't that a, they're back? Was that, where's that from? Is that from,
I forget what show it was.
E.T.
was that? It was one of those science fiction kind of.
It was
shows, but-
eating.
yeah, or somebody, but anyhow, it's
Terminator.
Saturday.
I'm back.
The Terminator. Oh, yeah, I'll be back. That's
I'll
for.
be back.
Oh, that's it.
Oh, I know what it was. That was it doesn't matter. No, it was a political thing, so I'm not even gonna go there. From years and years and years ago. But anyhow, it's Saturday, January the 7th, 2023. Okay, let's note we're starting a new year because the last one went by really fast. It seemed like we just said the same thing a year ago, but glad to be back. Hope everybody had a wonderful Christmas and New Year's, and we're ready to kind of restart again with our cynical. Just happy that both the people in the room and our folks that joined us via Zoom are with us today. It's feel like it's a blessing that we're all here together. Don't feel like we know that it is. I'll have to admit that Mary is not here. She's out in I think in Arizona at a conference. The last time that I kind of took this route, I titled on our note sheet here that we have, I told her that Potpourri, and she sent a message back and said, Potpourri, what the heck is Potpourri? And it's a column, it's a box in Jeopardy, which means a multiplicity of things. It doesn't necessarily follow a particular theme or route. We are working on some themes that we'll come forward with here over the next several weeks. Just not into a point to have them ready and to follow through. So today is a bit of a potpourri day. I think I'm on our document we have I've titled it Unity and various readings, and that'll kind of be if you want to open your umbrella and say, okay, what are we going to talk about? It's going to be kind of that unity in various readings, but even that is probably a little bit of a high level summary of where we're at. But we'll go and start a little bit further conversation here. But why don't we go ahead and say our entering in prayer, and then we'll start. And then we go to the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Come to thy will, come to thy witness one act. I want to grace my neighbor.
I want
To grace every thought, every action, and all the people I meet, the things I have to do, all my duties. I want all to be in your most holy will. I want to live the whole day right for the citizen in your most holy will. So that I should not be distracted, or if there be things I forget, may all be done in your will. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of the faithful, and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. Remember your congregation, which you have set them in the beginning. Oh, Lord, hear my prayer, and by my cry, to you. Fill my me with you, and with your let us God, this God works in the faithful, by the light of the Holy Spirit, grant us in the same Spirit, be true and wise, and to ever rejoice in his holy consolation. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So as we go through today, I'm counting on lots of comments or questions or observations as we normally do. And we were taught, for those that are catching us on video, we're talking a little bit before we click the record button about, the natural tendency when folks come back to work or come back to a project or whatever they happen to be working on after a period of time off, there's that catch up requirement, which the group has gone through here a bit. There's also kind of getting back into the swing of things of whatever our work is. And so, like I said, today, this is going to be like a potpourri of readings. But as I was kind of trying to think through, and I did start actually several days ago working through a theme. I had a particular writing that I read. I think it was January, I'm sorry.
December 19th, 1920.
Yeah, December 19th, 1926. When I read it back then, because I'm trying to read on the day basis now, it struck me, and so the weaving and the turning to get to where we are here on our readings today, it did maybe make some twists and some turns. But one of the things that over this period of time that I experienced were several readings that were clearly mystical. Louisa talks about clearly mystical experiences that she was having, and at the risk of not being awkward, but because we talked about this before, it had to do with suckling. And I got to thinking about the frequency by which those words are used by her, and that how there are folks that can read and the back of the hairs on the back of the neck can kind of go up in that kind of a conversation or those kinds of readings. And it led me to what we're going to talk about in our first couple of readings, as well as I've got the letter that Archbishop Vincenzo wrote back in 2000. It's a communication, as they call it, right after the 5 years of the translation of Louisa's writings. And I want to read a little bit from that too, because I think it does draw some things together and points us in areas of how we read these writings and how we think about them and how we observe them, and then ultimately how we apply them, which is what we're trying to do, is to take the information and the intention of these writings, bring them into the operating of our own lives. And that operating then turns around, and we become experiential in our world, and not only with ourselves, but also with other groups that we periodically come into contact with. So I'm hoping that as we go through that's kind of how I'm structured this a bit. So it's a variety of readings. There's a unity component to it. So on our paper here, we've said the unity through variety or the actual words, and some of what we have is kind of coming out. There'll be left field items, but that's okay, because that's going to cause us to think a little bit about this. The scripture that I wanted to use is actually today's scripture. And the reason I want to use it from today of the wedding feast of Cana is like many of us, I'm on a email subscription with Bishop Barron's Word on Fire Institute, and part of the revelation that he talked about, that he talked about today, his reference on how what the message he wants to get across. It kind of struck me, and it's a little bit different view, but you go back and look at some of the underlying intention, which that's going to be a word we hear about today. It just seemed to fit. So it's John 2:1-11, and I think everybody probably has it in whatever form they have, but it is the marriage at Cana. So the scripture reads, on the third day, there was a marriage at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the marriage with his disciples. When the wine failed, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "O woman, what have you to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now 6 stone jars were standing there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the steward of the feast." So they took it. When the steward of the feast tasted the water, now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Every man serves the good wine first, and when men have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Everybody knows this story. Everybody recognizes it's his, the first of his miracles, and his and Mother Mary coaxed him out of it and kind of led him into it along the way. In the reflection from, I want to say reflection rather than revelation. The reflection today that Bishop Barron added on this was an interesting view on it, and a different one than what we normally would have. And he said, "Friends, in today's gospel, we read about the wedding at Cana. Jesus's mother is the first to speak as John tells the story. They have no wine. On the surface level, she is indeed commenting on a social disaster, running out of wine at a party, and she is asking Jesus to do something to make things better. But let's go deeper. Wine in the scriptures is a symbol of the exuberance and intoxication of the divine life. When God is in us, we are lifted up, rendered joyful, transfigured. Therefore, when Mary says they have no wine, she is speaking of all of Israel, and indeed all of the human race. They have run out of the exuberance and joyfulness that comes from union with God. And this is precisely why Jesus calls her a woman. We can easily be misled into thinking that he was being curt or disrespectful, but he was addressing her with the title of Eve, the mother of all the living. Mary is the representative here of suffering humanity, complaining to God that the joy of life has run out. That just struck me, and I felt like I was called to just read that, and it's obviously a deeper view as he likes as he reflected on it. I don't know, did anybody have a perspective or an observation of just
Does
on
he
that
go on to say that we waited 2,000 years after Christ and now we have
Kind of the
Louisa?
divine will.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
Louisa.
that's saved the best wine.
That was what I was thinking.
Yeah, I think
That's
that's,
an interesting.
when I heard it, I thought that right away, but I wouldn't have thought that before reading the
Right.
Divine Will.
Yeah.
Now it's like,
It's like,
well, he
save the
saved
best
these-
for last.
yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Louisa, he gave her the writings and then the gift
I
of
mean,
living in
it's,
the divine.
yeah, it's not the people, it's the gift
Yes.
and whoever
Yes.
receives that gift. Yeah.
Right, and it's the same feeling. He uses exuberance and intoxication. And it's that same feeling when you get these writings and you get to
Yeah.
operate of his divine will. There's that peace, exuberance, and intoxication.
Mhm.
An intoxication with an understanding you've never had before.
Absolutely.
Taste something
Yes.
far beyond what you've ever
Absolutely.
tasted.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And you sip it.
Yeah, that's true. You sit. it.
So true.
Do you sip yours?
Sometimes both.
Yeah. But you're right, it's how it's savored.
Mhm. Yes.
It is interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, it was, I felt, wow,
Yeah.
that's I completely understand
Yeah.
that perspective of
Yeah.
it, other than just the intent being the miracle, the start of the miracles, but what was the intention? What was the underlying, what is it, the underlying message? That certainly could be one.
But Bishop Barron didn't take it any further to.
No,
say
no, no,
what-
I mean, he's very brief and
Yeah.
succinct
Okay.
in his writings, but
And Mary was
But
leading.
Louisa
always.
takes it a
Yeah.
lot farther if you were to read in the blue book. The rosary reflections and the wedding at Cana. She goes into very deep detail as to why he was there. It wasn't just to be at a party. But he went to sanctify marriage
Mhm.
for all generations.
But it's a, you know, what we love about all of our learning of the divine will is that we take the time to be here to talk about it. So we're slowing down, we are allocating our priorities to come to this understanding. And then with that allocation, it doesn't become an allocation anymore, right? It's just, we're all here because we want to be here. But there's so many ways and so many exposures that help us to understand the divine will, that and allows us to apply our understanding of the divine will into things that people are saying and can say, I see that, I see how it works, I see how it comes together, I see how it applies. And then for those that aren't yet exposed or have not yet have the desire or the disposal to come to learn these things, they're just they're nudges. It's a nudge of information that says, oh, that's a different way of thinking that, and it puts a perspective on it so that as sometime down the road, hopefully as they become exposed, they recognize their disposal and then charge down this thing called the divine will. So great. So our first reading is in volume 3. It's really early. It is January 8, 1900. It actually follows a reading that if you want to jot it down, that stirred, because there's a lot of that mystical conversation in the reading before this, but it's also I think an important comment that he's making to the those of us that are in our learning exercise. And that's January 8, 1900. Let me find my way over there. And it's not a long one, but it is. You hear him be pretty strong in what he's talking about. And there's several other of these similar types of phrases in these writings that he will bring out periodically. So January 8, 1900, the errors contained in these writings, which will do good, firmness and stability in operating. So this is 1900 when she's writing this down, just to kind of keep that in our brain of the timeline here and what he's telling her. I was thinking to myself, who knows how much nonsense, how many errors are contained in these things I write. And then he reacts pretty quickly there, right? At that moment, I felt I was losing consciousness, and blessed Jesus came and said to me, my daughter, errors too will do good, and this in order to make known that there is no artifice on your part, and that you are not some doctor, because if you were, you yourself would realize where you were mistaken. This will also make shine more that it is I who speak to you, by looking at it in a simple way. However, I assure you that they will find not a shadow of vice or anything which is not virtue, because while you write, I myself guide your hand. At the most, they may find a few errors at first sight, but if they look at them thoroughly, they will find the truth. So let's, that last word, that last sentence there, I want to just kind of store in your background of your head for a moment. At most, they may find a few errors at first sight, but if they look at them thoroughly, they will find the truth. Having said this, he disappeared, but after a few hours, he came back. I was feeling all hesitant and concerned about the words he had spoken to me, and he added, "My heritage is firmness and stability. I am not subject to any change. And the more the soul draws near me and advances on the path of virtues, the firmer and more stable she feels in operating good. And the farther she remains from me, the more she will be in subject to change, more she will be subject to changing and oscillating, now towards good, now towards evil." So that we're in volume 3 as he's saying this, and the volumes, as we know, up through volume 10 are about virtues and about understanding how, as we come to learn how to operate in the divine will, and we make our, we say our yes, and we are continuous in what we are doing. He tells us that the virtues, instead of being separate, they all combine into good and love the combination of all the virtues. So here he's talking separately and initially about virtues themselves, but along the path, there's also this knowledge that all virtues get combined, because Jesus is all virtues and he is all love. So,
And he's making it clear here that because I think what he's saying is because he chose someone who did not have any education. And so people aren't going to think that she probably could have written it. She's not a doctor, and I don't know how he meant that, but doctor of the church, I thought. She's not that. And so they could easily then decide that she didn't write it. And if she wrote it and there was an error in it, she wouldn't have written it, right? If it was her thinking, she wouldn't write something on purpose that was erroneous. So he's saying, no, you didn't write it. I'm guiding your hand.
That's right.
And when they read this, they'll realize that someone else must have given you these words, which is so true. I mean, I don't know that anybody can figure out
Absolutely.
this information
Thank you.
to have written it on their own. There's no one, no books.
from her bed over a period of
But even
50.
let's, we were talking about Pope Benedict, how knowledgeable he was. I don't think that, the Saint Augustine and stuff, all those Saint Thomas Aquinas, Pope Benedict, that they think they could have written this. I've read some of Pope Benedict's things, the Jesus of Nazareth. And in there, like, let's say the timing of the Passion and how it fell in that, John has a little bit different timing in his gospel for the Passion than what Matthew, Mark, and Luke do. And, and Pope Benedict he doesn't land on a super clear explanation of why that is. And if he has some question about that, I'm pretty sure not even that most learned man
I see
would
where
be
you're going,
able to have written this. So, we know it's written by Jesus. The more you read it, the more you go, wow, how did he know about Adam before the fall? How did he know about what he was doing in the womb of Mary? All of those things are things that, only a person there
Yes.
would know those
Didn't
things. So there's that, but just, the amount of the doctrine in here and everything, it's amazing. And so he's making it clear early on, you're not writing this, I'm guiding your hand.
Right.
And they will not find error in it, even though at first glance they may think there is, because they didn't know this before this. So they think, well, that can't be true. We never read this anywhere in the scriptures, this kind of detail. Well, he says, it's not an error. Of course, it's not an error.
Right. I kind of looked at that last and at the most, they may find a few errors at first sight, but if they look at them thoroughly, they will find the truth. And all, I think that also means keep reading.
Yeah, yeah. Right.
Well,
Because
one thing
reading
that,
forward.
I'm sorry,
Go ahead, Angela.
the one thing that struck me is exactly what Lyness is saying. At most, they will find a few errors at first sight, but if they look at them thoroughly, they will find the truth. And what was immediately put up on my heart, and Chip and I talked about this morning, is the catechism yesterday, which was truth cannot conflict with truth. And since everything that from God is true, it's impossible that it should lie, that he doesn't have the capacity of lying, that it must be the case that if this is Jesus, and we believe it is, of course, that there are no contradictions, it would be impossible. And so I just loved how we're reading this today, and we just covered that in the catechism yesterday.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
So let me just kind of add to that a little bit, exactly what we've just been talking about. You know, I think the divine will nation, I'll call it that, the accumulation of all divine will followers across the world, and whatever cynical they happen to be at, was anxiously awaiting the I think it was 5 priests that spent about 5 years going through these writings, translating, I guess, from the Corrado dialect into standard Italian, so that there could be further translations based upon standard Italian, and that there would be consistency, and that, you know, there would be a kind of adhered to ways of doing things. And so in 2020, however, it came out that the priest had finished the work, the translations were there, but they weren't ready to release them yet. That they're, and I'll read the exact words here. And there was, I think, a natural disappointment in the divine will nation, because there was the expectation of, okay, now we've got it, we're out, and they're gonna put it, the Vatican press is going to print everything up, and we're going to run forward from it. But that's not what happened. And there was a bit, I think, of disappointment. But when you take it in the context of what Jesus told her in that one line, let me read a few things to you, and then we can discuss, or whatever you're hearing from this on the other end. This first section of what I'm going to read is actually been written by the Public Association of the Faithful, the Luisa Picaretta, Little Children of the Divine Will. And so I'm going to read that first, which is kind of a lead in, and then because the Archbishop's letter is about 3 pages, I'm only going to read the part about the actual items that were translated. So the members of the Public Association of the Faithful, Luisa Picaretta, Little Children of the Divine Will, wish to express their gratitude to the Archbishop for his paternal encouragement. They make their own the words of the Archbishop in the communication, considering them as valuable indications not only for the work of the association in Corrado, but also for all other groups of the divine will throughout the world that want to keep their belonging to the Church alive. On that occasion, the Archbishop also spoke of his conversation with Cardinal Luis Lauderia, prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, during which he was told that by examining the writings of the servant of God, the congregation found some difficulties, some theological ambiguities not related to the life and virtues of the servant of God, and therefore the congregation did not consider it appropriate to grant the nihil obstat. Then the Archbishop added, a path opens. It can be an opportunity, that is, to examine in depth these writings with the help of expert scholars. Go back to what he told her about, they may find errors, but I'm sorry, they may find a few errors, but if they look at them thoroughly, they will find the truth.
Right.
So in the Archbishop's communication, the reason I'm reading the Archbishop from Trani is because Trani is the diocese that has responsibility for things Louisa. And so in this paragraph, he says, a team of experts organized by the Louisa Piccarata Association has spent nearly 5 years carrying out the arduous and complex task of carefully describing the original manuscripts of her diary notebooks, and has delivered a text faithful to the original as desired by the Congregation for the Causes of Saints. However, this merely marks a new starting point. In fact, the continuation of the cause for the beatification of the servant of God, that this is prior to them putting her beatification process on hold. To verify a new starting point. In fact, the continuation of the cause for the beatification of the servant of God to verify her exemplary conduct in life and her heroic exercises of the virtues cannot fail to take into account the fact that her writings present some ambiguities and equivocal elements. Though not to be considered doctrinal errors in themselves, these elements require great attention. The Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith has ruled that the message contained in her writings cannot be presented to the church today without further evaluation of them, which will take a long time due to the magnitude of the themes touched upon and the amount of text to be examined. I ask everyone to support this ongoing investigation through prayer and by offering any available material resources. He goes on, though, to talk about continuing to read these things, these writings, continuing to come to an understanding of them, and as importantly, to make sure that there's the unity message that's in here, because that don't conflict with other groups, because we're all trying to get to the same place. It's not a your way of interpreting is or reading means that I am wrong. It's the intention. And I'm sorry that I've got to read one more thing in that talks about the intention. Well, I can't find it, and I'm sorry that I should have highlighted it faster. But in 1900, he says this to her about, at the most, they may find a few errors at first sight. They've called them ambiguities, and interesting, because he then followed it up by saying there are no doctrinal errors, they're just ambiguities. So the church is following the path that he said that was going to happen with these writings. And that in and of itself, to me at least, that should give us confidence that the truth ultimately will become the truth, but that the scholars will need to take into account the various ambiguities that they have identified and discuss it and vet it out and meet it. We, through our perspectives of the writings, believe that this is exactly what Jesus has said and what it means. But we also recognize that we are a small group of individuals, and the church is talking about distribution across the church. So it has to be very careful. It has to go through these things.
Pope Benedict release these?
Well, Benedict is gave the approval for the 3 priests and the 2 lay people to take these writings, make copies of them, and distribute them out as has been happening. What has occurred over time that kind of brought them back to this level of having the priest kind of create a this is the official translation, is that there's a variety of translations in a variety of languages, and I think they probably felt that they were getting too proliferated, and maybe some people were taking liberties in the translation, so they wanted to bring it back and to have a standardized official, if you will, translation to it.
Subsequent to Pope Benedict releasing?
Yes, it was 95, I think is when they were released. This was 2020.
And Benedict
Yeah.
would have been
He spoke.
until 2005, he was the prefect for the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith.
Wasn't it 95?
He was, 2005, he was elected pope, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, and this was released in
He's in
95,
8
so
years.
he was the prefect at that time.
Mhm.
And then was elected pope in 2000, I think it was, I think that's when John.
And
Paul
he
II
told
died.
St. John, yeah, second about these writings and.
Yeah,
And.
right, and that's how.
He didn't, I could have this wrong, but didn't St. John Paul II say, these words are so holy, they should be read on your knees?
No,
I think that was
Pius.
Pius the 10th with
That was,
the
I always
hours
get
of
those two
the-
confused, yeah,
yeah,
in the hours of
But-
that,
yeah,
thank you.
but this is 2020, so, right?
Yes, this is in March of 2020.
2020, so it's quite subsequent to
Well,
the original
I don't
release.
know, one of the greatest theologians that we've ever had
Right.
released them.
Good enough for me.
Yeah,
That's what I always say. If
And there's,
Cardinal Ratzinger and Pope Benedict says it, I'll take it to the bank.
we all know that there's steps and spots along the way that reinforce, nothing contradicts. That's the thing, is that there
Right.
may be ambiguity about, all right, how do we take this concept and put it out or incorporate it completely?
So it is
completely-
I think the way this is doing it now.
Correct.
Yeah.
We as readers understand there are through the contents of some of the writings, but again, as he said, they may think they were errors or ambiguities. I'm going to use the term together. They may not necessarily be together, but once they investigate and they'll find out. So as
Yeah, at
as
first
this
sight, it looks like
investigation,
an error.
as this
but
investigation
really
happens, yeah.
is an ambiguity at the current time.
And I will just say this, at the very beginning, he says, thanks to the activity of the Public Association of the Faithful, Luisa Picaretta, FPFDV of Corrado, I've been able to learn about the surprising diffusion of the writings of the servant of God in many parts of the world, about the visits made by the faithful to the places relevant to her life, and about the solid network of groups present in various countries. I'm absolutely amazed by the fervor of this extensive community. I encourage everyone to continue along this rich and fruitful path toward holiness. So we're not shutting it down. I'm not, but it's not, condoned or incorporated because it's not yet gone through the exercise that the church needs.
Yeah,
to-
and we firmly believe what we heard from Angela, truth will
And not.
not contradict, one truth can't contradict another.
That's
truth.
right.
Well, look at the date that was written, March 4th, with 2020 hindsight. March 4th, 2020
Yes.
was the date,
Yes, that's the date he wrote it.
March
That's
4th,
the community, that's the date.
March 4th, the command, move forward with
Is that
2020
when Luther
hindsight.
died, was on March 4th?
No, John is making a point of the actual date.
The
Yeah,
date that this
yeah,
was written,
Yeah,
yeah,
say March 4th.
March 4th, so
Go forward.
continue forward with the hindsight.
March 4th.
2020
That's,
hindsight.
that's an interesting
Keep moving
observation.
forward.
Is that, yeah.
So I kind of just wanted to start out that I kept coming back to this initial point, and it's something just told me to kind of reiterate the kind of where we're at, what we're trying to, what we are trying to accomplish as understanders of these writings, or trying to be understanders of these writings. And that the way the church is approaching it as well, which is at its pace. And as he indicated, these kinds of things would be handled in 1900. So,
Mhm.
Yeah.
No, he got it out there early in the writings.
That's right.
yes. Okay, so any other comments maybe from Zoom folks, or anybody else have a thought or question? Okay, so our next reading then is in volume 12. January 7, 1921. Volume 12, January 7, 1921. Who would like to read this?
I'll read it.
Okay,
The smile of Jesus when he will the first fruits, the children of his will, living not in the human sphere, but in the divine sphere. As I was in my usual state, my always lovable Jesus came and surrounded my neck with his arm. Then he drew near my heart and holding his breast between his hands, he pressed it to my heart, and rivulets of milk came out of it. He filled my heart with those rivulets of milk, and then he told me, my daughter, do you see how much I love you? I want to fill all your heart with the milk of grace and of love. So everything you will say and do will be nothing other than the outpouring of grace with which I filled you.
hold 1 second. If you focus on the actual words, you lose the meaning. What he's basically saying, he is providing grace. But they are by nature, they allow us to be by grace, and there's mystical and spiritual and actual ways of providing grace. So the intention of this is for him to reinforce to her, you can do this because of my grace. Rather than how he described that grace coming to her. That's I mean, again, that's my perspective, but again, focusing on the intention of what is there is because sometimes we have a hard time, I being one, to think that to read mystical language and be able to somehow understand that.
And clearly it's not
You're not by yourself.
physical because no one thinks that milk goes into your heart.
Right.
Anyway, it would go into your stomach if he was really talking. He's
Right.
talking in a word, milk is something that everybody's used to. I mean, that's the life of food that you give to a baby, you start to feed them milk initially. And so it's clear he's using milk in a different way there because milk doesn't go to the heart.
Well, it's nourishment.
Yeah, it's nourishment, right? And it's grace and love.
Okay.
You will do nothing. You will just place your volition at the mercy of my will, and I will do everything. You will be nothing but the sound of my voice, the bearer of my will, the destroyer of the virtues in a human manner, and the restorer of the virtues in a divine manner, which are founded on an eternal, immense, infinite point. Having said this, he disappeared. After a little while, he came back, and I was feeling all annihilated, especially in thinking about certain things which it is not necessary here to say. My affliction was at its summit, and I said to myself, how can this be? My Jesus, do not permit this. Maybe you want the will, but not the act of this sacrifice. And then, in the hard state in which I find myself, I aspired to nothing but heaven. And Jesus, coming out of my interior, burst into sob. I could hear that sob resound in heaven and on earth, but as he was about to stop sobbing, a smile arose which, just like the sob, reverberated in heaven and on earth. I remained enchanted, and my Jesus told me, my beloved daughter, after the great sorrow which creatures are giving me in these sad times, to the extent of making me cry, and because this is the crying of a God, it resounds in heaven and on earth, a smile will take over, which will fill heaven and earth with gladness. This smile will arise on my lips when I see the first fruits, the children of my will, living not in the human sphere, but in the divine sphere. I will see them all marked with the eternal, immense, infinite will. I will see the eternal point which has life only in heaven, flow upon earth and mold the souls with its infinite principles, with divine acting, with the multiplication of acts within one single act. And just as creation came out from the fiat, in the fiat it will be fulfilled. Only the children of my volition will accomplish everything in the fiat. And in my fiat, which will have life in them, I will receive complete love, glory, reparation, thanksgiving, and praise for everything and for everyone. My daughter, things returned there where they come from. Everything came out from the fiat, and in the fiat, everything will return to me. They will be few, but in the fiat, they will give me everything.
That's quite a summary of exactly what's happening. It's good.
What do we give him? Love, glory, reparation, thanksgiving, and praise. On behalf of all creatures, so for everything and everyone. And on the scale due to the God, which is the divine, or the divine sphere, as he's called it. It is. And when it doesn't happen, the sob and the cry is heard not only on earth, but also in heaven. And when he does, this is going to be a bad exercise, but when the bell rings that someone else has given their yes, then that smile and that happiness
Exuberance and
reverberates as well.
intoxication.
The exuberance and the intoxication, as you said. Good point.
It's kind of like the letter from the Archbishop. This is all happening with no one seeing it. The Archbishop, I think, was kind of scratching his head when he realized.
Just how big it
people-
is.
Yes, there's people all over the world reading
Yeah.
this. And it's
Nobody knows.
shocking to him. Nobody knows it's all happening, but we're multiplying our acts. And in heaven, it says the eternal point. That's when it happens. And that's that one point. It's happening.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. But in time, people don't even see it going on because it's under the radar and like,
But we get to
Yeah,
know the secrets.
you can
yeah.
sit there and look like you're doing nothing.
Yeah.
Thank you, God.
Yeah.
Do that one.
And as there's so many conversation points that we have about the divine will. And, in our 4 category slots that we put the information and the knowledges that come to us from structural to spiritual to mystical to theological. And when we in the end know that those are all simply different ways of learning, or from the perspective of different seats in the basketball court, as we said an example before. All of these things are focused on God receiving respect for all that he created, for every single act that he created, every single act of all lives from Adam to the last man. And he's allowing the children of the divine will, by virtue of them having given God their will, wanting to operate in God's will, allowing God to take control. By virtue of that, these individuals are finding themselves operating in the divine sphere, as he says, so that when love is given, when acts are seen and identified and say, God, I want to give you all these acts, then it becomes on that same scale by which he issued them. And what we know is what he's looking for is for every act to be returned to him on the divine scale with love, honor, thanks, and glory by the children of the divine will. Because Jesus did it first, and then Mary did it second, and Louisa did it third, by virtue of the grace that she received that we just talked about. And all else, I know I simplify things for me and sometimes too simply, but all else is work that's going on in the background to accomplish it. But the mission of the children of the divine will is to bring these acts back to the Creator, to the Trinity, with the thank you, with the I love you, with the I adore you, so that the respect that is due to God for everything that he has put out here comes back to him. Not that he has to have it, he needs to have it. It's just that it's a form of justice, if you will, because it is the scale of issuing needs to be balanced with the scale of receiving back. That's just justice. And when that gets out of whack, that's when we see the calamities happen.
From this simple side, I have a hard time on acts that I try to do that are on good things, and then you offer it for reparation. That just, here I'm taking something that's really great in our lives, like the birth of our grandnephew, and so here it is.
Yes.
For reparation. Be specific on it.
How many, number one, how many births,
What,
how many births were not, didn't have that same love that you're offering up? A lot, right?
Yeah.
Well, we know certainly in the abortion world, let's just take that as an example. So in our human will, this is, as Jesus tells Louisa, this is a kind of a tenet of the difference. It's not a good or a bad, but it's a tenet of the difference. In our human will, it's a good act. We are intending for it to be a good act, and we want it to be a good act. But because it is offered with our human will, that act only lasts for the time that it was offered. There's death to it. That act has a death.
There's
to
a
it.
beginning and
A
end.
beginning and an end. It's of time and circumstances. Through this gift of the divine will, we are allowed by giving our will to God and accepting his will as they operating and what we do day in and day out, we become on a scale, the same scale of God. And so when we're loving with his love, we assume that likeness that's talked about in the image and likeness way back in Genesis, in the way that we were created. This is Jesus telling Louisa this, not me saying this. So when we are operating of his will, and you are giving the love and the honor and the glory for that birth back to God, you're not only giving it for your grandson, you're now capable and are giving it for all children that are born.
that was
So
included, but
And that life, that has eternal life. It's always happening. It never dies. So in the divine sphere, as he called it in that earlier reading, those acts are continuous. They're alive. They don't, as on earth, they don't just happen. And then the baby is alive and is going through its acts that God has put in place for him. But that act of the birth is now passed, and is of time and circumstance, and it's not alive. Whereas in the divine sphere, it is alive. It stays alive. There took me a while to get my head on that, but to be honest.
and then do you have to take it to the next level and say, actually offer it as a retribution?
Well, it is as a reparation or repair.
Redo.
It comes as a repair. I think there's a cycle. I won't use the word process, but I'll say a cycle that we all kind of go through as these knowledges become more comfortable and we have more understanding of them. That when you are saying, giving God these I love yous, they act as a reparation as well. You can say I repair. If you want to be focused and say, I want to use these words now that I'm talking to you, and as we are communicating, I'm repairing. I want to repair for all the births that were not done in glory to you. I'm giving you those.
I don't
But
know
you're
where I
also,
read it, but I said, if you didn't take it and actually say,
if you didn't say it, it didn't get done.
well, or maybe until it becomes automatic, whether you may not say, I love you every moment you see your wife, but it's there,
Right.
maybe in the same way.
Well, we are entering in prayer at the very end of it. As you recall, we say, I want your will to be done, even though I may be distracted or there may be things I forget. So by what he tells us, which again is to me, it's a confidence builder, so that I don't have to worry about, oh, did I say reparation? Or did I say love? Did I say adoration? What he tells us is as you operate in the divine will, you're very your very act of operating, it's not just of living, of breathing, of talking. That's creating reparations. That is giving God love just by virtue of you operating in the divine will. So you don't always have to say, oh, I want to be specific about love, adore, praise, honor, repair. It just, it's part of what happens by operating in the divine will. And every one of us, I'll put my $100 on the table here. Every one of us, when we first started coming in, what was the first thing that we were consumed with? And that was, okay, did I say this? Did I say that? Did I do this? Did I say I love you? So, and that's part of the growth, I think, in the will. And as knowledge has come back to you, there's that confidence that comes that says, I don't have to always say it. They love it when we do. They don't want us not to, but by virtue of the will being given and sacrificed to the Trinity, and the Trinity being operating in us, it comes regardless. And that sacrifice of giving the will is, as we just heard, it creates the big smile of the shout for joy on earth and in heaven. But I think, if I'm answering this, I hope I'm answering this for you. Certainly the way that it occurred for me is everything became what are the steps I need to take? I want to make sure I'm doing all the steps, I'm saying all the things, I'm thinking, whatnot. And what we come to learn through this the meetings and the conversations and with people that are that we can hear and listen to and talk with, is there's the realization of by virtue of operating in the divine will, because we gave our yes and we want it, and we know that God wants to give it, and that we know that God can give it, therefore it is. Then when we're operating, they get love, honor, and glory through all of the acts that we're doing anyway. And then we also then have the extra benefit of saying, as I see something bad happening, Lord, I repair for whatever. I want to give you love, honor, and glory for the act, but I want to repair for the human will, the way the human acted on that act, if you will. The same way as I'm cresting a mountain, and all of a sudden there's the sea or whatever, and the sun setting, and I want to give you love, honor, and glory for your creativity, and you're a great artist, or however it manifests itself. To me, it strengthens the inner conversation and the inner relationship, because this is all about internal. This is all internal.
Right.
And what happens through this gift is that you find yourself communicating, however frequent and with whatever level of intensity I may have been communicating before, after understanding and starting to maintain and operate from these knowledges, it's an even higher level of communication that happens, and that's what he wants, is communication with us, right? I mean, it's in the recognition of him as the creator, as the and the Trinity itself as they are God. Nothing else is God but them.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, I really went long-winded there. I hope I answered that. So, well, I didn't mean to go that long.
Here, I appreciate it.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that besides me? I mean, I'm giving it my perspective, and obviously anybody out on Zoom that may want to add into that.
Well done, evidently.
Okay.
It's just your being.
And it goes through stages, and we go through stages that are, as humans, we want to segregate things, and we want to call them stages and steps. But what's really happening is that through our learning, just like a bicycle, I'll just go riding a bike. What's the first thing we did when we learned to ride a bike? Hold the handlebars, hit my feet, pump my feet. I'm thinking of it. I'm thinking of everything that I have to do to how do I stop? Oh, I can push my brakes backwards, and It's everything that we have to do to ride the bike. 2 years later, what happens? We jump on the bike and we go down the street, we don't even think about it.
Second nature.
It's second nature, and that's how this works, is that we want to start out by remembering the steps and reading, and so I want to follow everything that I read, or that I've got some kind of a white paper or a document that somebody's put out, so I want to follow that, and those are all great things, and that's as humans, I think that's how we want to approach things. But in the end, what do we find? Those push to the wayside. And it's just a second nature as we operate. And then as we learn more and more from these writings and we bring them into how we operate, it does the same thing. It gets incorporated into how we operate, and it becomes second nature, because that's the way they want us to be. And there's confidence that comes from that. Go ahead.
Just to, the way that Mel was explaining it always makes sense to me. And your question is not the first time it's been asked. I've heard it
Sure.
many times.
We all had the same question.
Including me. And the acts kind of get some of us, but it, with the purity of your intention,
He
And
takes care of
he
it.
takes care of it. And as you keep, moving forward every day, that's how my confidence built up, and I became more, knowledgeable, I guess, if you will, of what he wants of me. And so it just,
Okay.
it's perfect. Get on the bike, and you're right. At the beginning, it's so much information. Am I doing this right? And then after time.
Right, and
will
when you're
become more
riding,
comfortable.
There's the exuberance and the intoxication.
Exactly.
But one of my kids ran in the back of a car.
Okay.
That's it.
Too much exuberance.
Thank you, Jesus.
He wasn't paying attention.
Well, Jesus says be attentive, right?
Keep your eyes, yeah.
Okay, so our next reading is volume 20, December 19th, 1926. December 19, 1926. And this reading is somewhat, I'll say in that bucket, it's a kind of a structural thing, because as I was reading, I went, holy cow, I understand, I see this, that makes sense, that makes this, and I hope it strikes everyone the same as it struck me, but this was kind of the first reading that I had that I wanted to start with this, but then as we were talking, Jesus said, no, I think I'd rather you cut these couple other things here in front, so that's good. But December 19, 1926, who would like to read that?
And that's it.
All right. December 19th, 1926, everybody there?
No.
Okay.
You're there.
My phone's gonna be in trouble.
Yeah,
We started early.
Yeah.
I'm so proud of you.
It's very nice.
That's okay.
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 Thanks.
How the divinity bilocated its will in the creation. The nature of the divine will is happiness. How it constituted itself act of everything, and the possession it wants to give to the creature. I continue in my state of abandonment in the supreme volition. And while I was going around with my mind in the whole creation, to follow it in all created things and make my will one with its own, to form one single act with its own, my always lovable Jesus, making me pause, told me, my daughter, in releasing the creation, the divinity bilocated its will, and one remained within us for our regime, joy, happiness, contentments, and innumerable and infinite beatitudes, which we possess, because our will has the first place in all of our acts. The other bilocated will of ours came out from us into creation to give us all externally honor and divine glory, happiness, and innumerable joys. In fact, our will possesses joys, happiness, and beatitudes as its own qualities. This is its nature, and if it did not release from itself these beatitudes, the innumerable contentments it possesses, it would be something against its own nature. Now, the Supreme Majesty, by releasing our bilocated will into the whole creation, so that it might be constituted life and act of each created thing, unleashed from itself innumerable riches, countless beatitudes and joys, which only the power of the eternal fiat could preserve, maintaining their regime so as never to let them lose their integrity and beauty. Now, while all these properties which came from us glorified us, giving us the glory of as many continuous and divine acts for as many created things as came out to light, they were established as properties of the creatures, who, uniting their wills to ours, were to have their act in each act of our will in such a way that, just as we were to have the divine act of our will in each created thing, we were to have the act of the creature transfused as if they were one alone. With this, she would come to know her riches, and by knowing them, she would love them and acquire the right to possess them. How many divine acts does my supreme will not do in each created thing? And the creature has not even the slightest knowledge of these acts. And if she does not know them, how can she love them and possess them, being unknown to her? Therefore, all the riches, the happinesses, the divine acts contained in the whole creation are inactive and lifeless for the creatures. And if they receive anything at all, it is not as property, but as the effect of the supreme goodness, which always gives of its own. It gives as alms, also to those who have no right of possession others, then take them as usurpations. In fact, in order to possess these goods which the celestial Father has put out in the creation, the creature must follow its course. She must rise to union with the divine will in order to work together with it and do the same acts, to know them in order to do them, so as to be able to say, what it does, I do. With this, she acquires the right of possession in all the acts of this supreme will. And when two wills form one single will, mine and yours no longer exist. Rather, by right, what is mine is yours, and what is yours is mine.
Can you hold right there?
Yeah, this is exactly what we've been talking about.
So here's what I was thinking when I was reading this. Talked about acts, the singleness of acts, like a cell of an animated picture. And my kingdom is my set of acts that God has created for me when he issued creation. And it's my arm moving out, if you think of it, is the in an animation set, it's multiple cells with just a little bit of movement, something new, a new creation in each one of those cells. But when God created them, there was no movement. It was just this box full of cells in order from beginning to the end of my life that God created. So just like in an animated story or a cartoon, the animation are all the cells. What brings that to life is motion. It's the projector, if you will. Those cells are run through a projector, and then what do we see? We see, the animation. So God created, and then he's bringing us to light, as we've heard him say, which is our birth, he's bringing us into light. So how do we move? How does that happen? Well, he just told us they bilocated their divine will into the creatures. And the divine will is what gives the creatures its motion, its action, because he's told Louisa before, if the divine will is not present, there is no life. So the divine will is, and we also know the divine will is all in creation. It runs through all creation.
That's basically what you just said. That-
Exactly.
That nephew is in just a little piece, but unless you,
That's right. It's a single act.
Yeah.
And if and the intention, as he talked about here. All right, I'm sorry, let me stop back. So you've got the bilocated will is how it was intended to be, with that will fusing with the human will and giving back to God the love, honor, and glory for those acts that he made for me during my lifetime. And I, as king or lord, have dominion over my kingdom, which are these acts.
And that's where you were saying, this act was done, this creation of this new great grandnephew, whatever, was done and was intended just for that family, for that child to be born, who also off to the side here is going to have their own set of acts. That was the original intent. And that's what Mel's saying here, is that there's this file cabinet of acts that were intended just for us. But that was us living in the divine will.
Right. And so, and this is me again, I'm giving you
Before
my vision on how I interpret, how I pull this into operate. But these acts that are being operated, that are being brought to life by the divine will, as they happen, when that act is there, who's going to have control, or who's going to respond to that act? Is the divine will going to respond to it, or is the human will going to respond to it? When the human will manages and responds to that act, that's when it stays. That's after the fall. That's when it stays as a dead act. But if the divine will is merged, as we just read, if you go back into the spent time on, but if the divine will is merged with it, then the act has life, and it gives the honor, love, and glory back to the Father in the same scale by which it was created. And when that happens, there are fruits that are released, that the Trinity is assigned to that act. So when it comes back to him, it gets released. So when Jesus did all of this in his life, those fruits are released from his living and operating and repairing all the acts for humanity that he did, which is why we can even have access to God right now. Those fruits remain suspended, so they're out there to be taken. And when Mary did the same thing, when children of the divine will allow and acknowledge God is the operator in their life, and we learn these knowledges and we accept it, then as we repair, as we give the reparation for these acts as they happen, then those fruits, the fruits of those acts get released. They're from the suspended states. They're still suspended because there were multiple times that we all prayed for unborn children, as an example. And as in the divine will, as we operate that way, those fruits get released
That's great.
as grace, and also as dewfall, as we call it. And the Trinity then can take that dewfall, those graces and they can use that all across creation from beginning to end, and use that in the terrestrial world, the terrestrial sphere, to show good and to be able to help people, or to help people become disposed, or bring them back into a realm of faith, or whatever the intention is. And when Adam fell, we lost that automatic tie-in, But what he has provided to Louisa with this gift is now the understanding that there is a way that we can return to the order and the place and the purpose for which we were created to do this exact thing, which is to give to God what is due to God on the scale to God. But he's also added in, as now at this timing of it, on behalf of all creatures, past, present, and future, so that's why the few, the children of light, by operating in the divine will and giving these acts back to God, can get all acts back to God, because we know that many acts of humans are, by the humans actually doing that act, are not going to come back to God. But what he wants is he wants all of the acts to come back to him. And this is the way that it happens, is that we are able to direct those acts back to him. There's more. Go ahead. I'm sorry again.
Sure, of course. This is why my supreme will calls you, awaits you in each created thing, to make you know the riches which are in it, to make you repeat its divine acts along with it, and to give you the right possession. You yourself become its own property. You remain dissolved within its immense riches and within its very acts. And oh, how the divine fiat enjoys making you the owner of its immense riches, its desires of constituting its heiress is so great that it feels twice as happy when it sees one who knows its possessions and makes its divine act her own. In fact, even though I saw that man, by withdrawing from its will, lost his way to reach the possession of its dominions, it did not stop. But in the excess of its love and of its long sorrow of seeing its riches inactive for the good of creatures, as soon as the eternal word clothed himself with human flesh, it became life of each one of his acts, to form more goods for them, powerful helps and effective remedies, more within the means of decayed humanity, so as to realize the purpose of making them possess what was released into creation. There is nothing that comes from us which does not have this purpose, that the creature and everything may return into our will. If it were not so, we would render ourselves foreign to our own works. Therefore, creation, redemption, my daughter, have the primary purpose that everything be our will, in heaven and on earth. So, wherever it flows, it finds itself everywhere, to make everything its own, and to give everything which belongs to it. Therefore, be attentive in following our works. Satisfy this desire, so insistent, of my supreme will, which wants those who possess its goods. Yeah. It just validates everything, yeah, that we've been talking about.
By the way.
And to look
since
under
this
the hood too,
Yes.
so to speak.
Right. Because this is volume 20, this is one that Frances Hogan has read too, so if those of you listen.
I'm sure
to
she had
Hogan,
great notes on it.
She
Yeah.
probably does, yeah, I'm past that, but I'm sure I forgot it all, but it's, yeah, that's one other source of going to hear just how she might explain this, but pretty clear what the intent is here. And it's the genius part of all this. Not only God could have the genius and the power to make this happen.
You know, one thing I learned about Francis Hogan, you think, well, you got the date, and you take it halfway through about, because that's the time period. You cannot find it that way. I ended up listening to the whole volume.
Right.
It drives me crazy. And that's a long commitment.
Right. Oh, yeah, yeah. If you think you're just gonna
Yeah.
pop in and pick it up somewhere and, yeah, it's hard to
Yeah,
find.
George, that says so much. That says so much.
Mhm.
But you know, Frances does a really good job of,
Mm.
she moves back and forth between a writing and scripture.
Yes.
And so it's a, for me at least, it's another indication of how, I think we've used the terms how the scripture and the catechism and the book of heaven hold hands together. And how that bucket of theological, the theological bucket for the theological minded folks, it's good to have those kinds of readings and education coming from someone, because that does know how and can
I
point
made
you
the
directly.
tremendous mistake of trying to, every time she quoted the Bible, go look it up, pause her stuff and then go back.
Oops.
That takes,
Oh, yeah.
after I started for a while, I said, there's no way.
It's
you
gonna
can
be
do it."
done today. It's gonna be 20 years.
Okay,
And the same thing happens, you know, with this catechism in a year, that goes back to scripture too, of course, you know, all the
the catechism is
footnotes.
based upon scripture.
Yes, it's right there. People think, well, this can't be true, what the Catholic Church is teaching. It's like, well, there's the scripture for it. And so, yeah, it's all, but the same thing with this. It's
I'm
all
so
based on
disappointed in
scripture.
Father Mike. Not Schmidt, but our pastor, and he didn't use the wheelbarrow. He didn't pull that one out.
Oh, yeah, yes.
To me, that just
a great
knocked me over,
example.
but
Mhm.
obviously it didn't impress.
Well,
him.
you're coming at it from the standpoint of the divine will. And the covenant or the belief, the trust and all that, that is the
But
foundation
how many
of
of us can
that.
get in that wheelbarrow and say,
Right,
okay,
that's it. That's
But,
totally-
and the words that are in the catechism does say
Oh, yeah.
entrustment,
Yeah.
entrust. It says that in the wording of the catechism. So, you know, it does all tie together. We believe in, you know, we believe, and then we have to put our trust in this. And that's the next step, to intellectually believe.
I don't think I heard
But
the word
then it
entrustment
is.
from him either.
No, I don't think he said it yesterday. Father Mike at
Oh,
our church
Yeah.
didn't say it,
Yeah.
but Father Mike Schmitz read
right.
the catechism
Higgins.
words. Higgins, yeah. I never remember our
I
pastors'
remember, but
last
slow.
names. I just know they're mostly Irish. I don't know if Higgins is.
Well, he's got a heck of a background,
Oh, yeah,
and he didn't, you know, he
yeah, he's.
is a
tall.
theologian too, Franciscan theologian.
No, he knows his stuff.
Okay, again, I'm gonna reach out to our folks on Zoom, any questions, comments, observations before we go to the next reading?
I just think that we should reflect on what a great gift God is giving us, that we can give him back everything with just our purity of intent, not just our purity of intention, but we don't have to lift a finger literally to do it. We just have to intend to do it and do it with the love, his love.
Mhm.
It's an
Exactly.
amazing gift.
Great
So
point.
But he
simple, but
makes-
so.
He makes it so easy, although
Yeah.
it's not easy, because giving your will up, giving your human will up is not an easy task, but he makes it so easy that as long as you're serious and constant and are intent about it, he'll even do the work, you know. He said, I'll come in and I'll do everything. All I want is you to be serious about this.
Oh, and I can do it better than you.
Yeah, well, right, and that's probably on the back of his mind too.
Yes, it's just like living life in the human sphere. It can be so complicated. There's so many options that's out there and many ways to go in life and things to choose to do. But it's so simple what he created life to be. You know, it pulls you away, of course, from the human sphere into the divine sphere, and he makes it so easy to be in union with him if you want it.
Right, and it's, you know, and again, I'll say the great thing about this plan also is he knows that there's going to be folks that are not disposed to this, and that's perfectly fine. But that for folks that are not disposed, that they have the path of redemption, right? And he's got different catch basins and
Safety
ways to get that one that left the 99 to come back in. So he's got 100 at the end of the day. That it's just the immensity and the wisdom and the power of how all this is put together and is happening is it's hard to comprehend many times. It's so large
Yeah.
and beyond what we know that we our little brains can deal with. All right, let's look at our next reading, which is in volume 13. In January 3, 1922. January 3, 1922. And remember to put a comma after the 3, so you don't get all the 3s and the 30s in there when you. Who would like to read this?
I'll do it.
Okay, George.
The revelations which existed between the divine will and the human will. Continuing in my usual state, my always lovable Jesus, on coming, told me, daughter of my volition, come into my will that you may know the relations which exist between the divine will and the human will, which the creature shattered from the very terrestrial Eden. But the soul who knows no other life but the life of my will rebuilds my will, binds it once again, giving back to it all the relations which the creatures had broken, relations of creation and of the principle of existence. These were bonds of union between creator and creature, relations of likeness, sanctity, science, power. Everything I contain, I place in relation with man, relations in order of all created things. And to him I give my principally over everything. Now, by withdrawing from my will, he broke all these relations and placed himself in relation with sin, with pleasures, with his fierce enemy. Therefore, the soul who lives in my will rises so high as to leave everyone behind. She places herself in order between me and her. She gives herself back to the origin and places all broken relations in force. All created things from her cortege and recognize her as their legitimate daughter, feeling honored to be dominated by her. The purpose for which they were created, to be commanded and to obey her slightest wishes, is always accomplished. Therefore,
Just 1 second there. Thinking back to what he's saying here, Adam had dominion over all created things, right? And when he says to her, therefore the soul who lives in my will rises so high as to leave behind everyone, she places herself back in order or in order between me and her. She gives herself back to the origin and places all broken relations in force. All created things form her cortege and recognize her as their legitimate daughter, feeling honored to be dominated by her. So that's the order, the place, and the purpose for which we were created. And he obviously goes through that with his next sentence. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm going to start with, I'm not sure where I
The
started.
purpose
You say the
for
purpose for which they were created.
which they were created.
The purpose for which they were created, to be commanded and to obey her slightest wishes, is already accomplished. Therefore, all nature remains reverent and around her, and exalts in seeing that finally its God receives the glory of the purpose for which he had created it, that of serving man. And so fire, light, water, cold will let themselves be commanded and will faithfully obey. And just as my love immediately prepared the remedy in order to save man by descending from heaven and becoming man, So this soul who lives in my will by giving herself back to the beginning, to her eternal origin from which she came, even before my humanity was formed, already kissed and adored my blood and my wounds, honored my steps and my works, and formed a worthy portage to my humanity. O soul which lives in my will, you alone are the purpose of the glory of creation, the decorum and the honor of my works, and the fulfillment of my redemption. In you, I centralize everything. May all relations be given back to you. And if out of weakness you should lack something for the decorum and the honor of my will, I will make up for you in everything. Therefore, be attentive and give this highest contentment to your Jesus.
I don't know why you didn't just let that out.
I don't either. I was afraid I'd be loud. like urgency.
I didn't hear what you,
I was trying to hold back a sneeze.
oh. I would have shook the room, it would have stopped me.
No.
Yeah, I felt as I was reading this, it came about on the 3rd, obviously, when the date is. Again, that adjustment of the relationship between the creature and the creator back to its intended purpose, and what happens, what can happen, what will happen accordingly. You've heard Mary say a lot of times, command it. Well, it's what he says here, command it. And it
What is it though? That anything?
anything,
Oh,
all, because as Adam had dominion over everything, as we return back to that order of place and purpose, then, and God has dominion over everything, and the likeness, the image of God, we're working under now, but we're trying to return back to where we are constantly operating in the likeness of God. Then that dominion comes with it. And it'll manifest itself different ways. Sometimes it'll be obvious and sometimes it won't be so obvious, but this, at least that's as I've kind of seen it. But the last sentence that he says there, not the last sentence, hold on. Next to the last. He says this in several different places throughout the readings in different ways, but and if out of weakness you should lack something for the decorum and the honor of my will, I will make up for you in everything. So he will do the work. Father Brown used to describe the passage, the life and the divine will, as the divine will is like a book or a gift. And if you want it, he hands it to you. And you're able to operate of it. And with your intention and with your constancy / consistency, you become stronger in the way that you operate with it. But Jesus is still holding on to the book until the point in time that there will be a test. But until the point in time that we have the test, and he is comfortable in letting go of it, because he doesn't want to let us have it if we're just going to turn around and, right, well, we're just going to toss it off to the side. He wants to make sure of our consistency and our intention and our learning and our incorporation of how to operate in the divine will in us. But what he says is, like you said right here, if you stumble, if you have a little bit of stuff going on or whatever, you maybe forget, or you may be distracted. He loves the fact that we're trying to do this so much that he comes in and he makes up and he makes it right. And then And then when he trusts us, just says, because there's a commitment on both parts that has to take place, he tells her. And then visually, as he used to say, then he'll let go of the book, and then, which is the gift, and it's 100, you're operating in it 100%. You're operating in it the moment you decide you want to take the book. It's just that he wants to make sure when he makes his commitment back that your commitment is comparable. And this is what we're doing while we're trying to take all these knowledges and put them inside of us, is to get stronger and stronger and stronger, and how we do these things.
I just wanted to also comment that man on earth right now is still trying to be God. He's trying to be God of himself, but he cannot create something out of nothing or command the seas or the sun or the wind. But here in this reading, we're saying, just as my love immediately prepared the remedy to save man by descending from heaven and becoming man, it's saying to me here that God is running after man. He's running after us, giving us the gift to be God, to be what he is by grace.
Yeah.
He's actually running after us. And we're trying to do it on our own, and we can't. He's pursuing us to give us that gift.
He is chasing us all over the place.
All right.
You couldn't make it any clearer, right?
Right.
And we are like toddlers who are running from our parents, right?
But like what you're saying there, that part of the reading, that I found that so interesting, because God's coming for those who aren't going back to him through the study of the divine will. But right after it says, so this soul who lives in my will, by giving herself back to the beginning, which you do when you're living in the gift, you go back to the beginning. So she's gone back to her eternal origin from which she came. And even before my humanity was formed, she already kissed and adored my blood, my wounds. She honored my steps, my works, and formed a worthy cortege to my humanity. It's kind of that's where he's kind of blending the two together. His humanity, our finite time on earth, so that part of our life, the finite aspect of our life, he came to bring us back and to save those people through redemption. But then he says, when you're living in the divine will, even though here we are, 2023, we're living, over 2,000 years after he was born, but we've already, because we're repairing in eternity, we've already kissed his wounds and everything, even though we're 2,000 years later. The whole thing is like, oh my God.
Because there's no time.
Right. Now he's talking about eternity. That little sentence there that he's combining his time on earth, but our time in eternity.
I love that.
It's beautiful reading.
Yes.
That's why I'm saying, who could have written this stuff? It had to be Jesus. That's the only way it makes sense, and it's logical. Where this might be something where the Archbishop is like, oh, hey, this is hard to fathom this. Well, it sort of is hard to fathom this until you get into this. Jesus teaches you these things and how creation obeys us. You're saying that, Mel, we have command over creation. And it was made for that. That's why he made creation first. So man wasn't here with nothing. He
Man
made
was last.
creation. Yes. Creation was all ready so that we could live in creation, which he had created for us, for man.
And he talks about that in a variety of ways too. When he uses the examples of kings, kings just don't come in to their kingdom. There's their ministers, their missionaries, their cordage, it builds, and all those things get put in place first, which is similar to what creation was put into place prior to man.
And then wrapping it up with what our Angela said, truth cannot conflict with truth.
So let me just ask this, it's 1:00. We did get started a little bit late. This last reading, January 1, 1927, is a little bit longer than these ones that we've had. Happy to go to read this reading if we like. Just wanted to put it in front of everybody. I see John nodding.
Already sent it out, so. I sent it out in chat, so we have to do it.
All right, so John is preempting.
John.
That's right.
Seems to me then that John might be an appropriate reader.
John's gotta find it. Hold on, John.
January 1, 1927, which is in volume 20. Just keep my coffee in there.
January 1, 1920.
27.
I'll just say. Got it. I'm gonna go visit you. Coffee wasn't-
And also, if anybody at Zoom would like to.
It keeps to read of heaven. Just keep touching it. So okay.
Do you want to read it, John? Or
I can do that, sure. I think I'm there. I probably don't know if I'd be Jan, but.
You did. I had to start from scratch. I lay my phone down. Oh, you have? The 7. See, I said 11.
Right.
Everybody ready?
January 1, 1927. The will of the soul was present for baby Jesus. All his whole life was a symbol and the calling of the divine will. How the knowledges are the means in order to hasten the coming of the kingdom of his will. Parenthetically, I was meditating on the old year which was setting and the new one which was rising. My state continues in the flight of the light of the divine will, and I was praying the pretty little baby that just as the old year was dying, never to be born again, so he would make my will die and live no more. And as present for the new year, he would give me his will, just as I gave him the gift of mine, so as to place it as footstool at his tender little feet, that it might have no other life but his will alone. Now, while I was saying this and other things, my sweet Jesus came out from within my interior and told me, daughter of my will, how I love, want, yearn that your will may end in you.
No.
Oh, how I accept your present. Hold on one sec. Lacey decided to be director.
That is creation, impacted.
Yeah. Let's see. Daughter of my will, how I love, want, yearn that your will may end in you. Oh, how I accept your present. How pleasing it will be for me to keep it as a soft footstool at my feet. In fact, as long as it remains in the creature, outside of its center, which is God, the human will is hard. But when it enters again into the center from which it came, serving as footstool at the feet of your little baby Jesus, it becomes soft, and I use it to amuse myself. Is it not right that, little as I am, I have an amusement? And that in the midst of so many sorrows, privations, and tears, I have your will to make me smile. Now you must know that one who puts an end to her will returns into the origin from which she came, and the new life, the life of the light, the perennial life of my will begins in her. See, when I came upon earth, I wanted to give many examples and similes of how I wanted the human will to end. I wanted to be born at midnight, so as to break the night of the human will with its refulgent light of mine. And even though at midnight the night continues, it does not finish. It is yet the beginning of a new day. And my angels, to give honor to my birth and to point out to everyone the day of my will, from midnight on, gladden the vault of the heavens with new stars and new suns, such as to turn the night into more daylight. This was the homage that the angels gave to my little humanity, in which resided the full day of the Son of my will, and the calling of the creature into the full day of it. Still little, I submitted myself to the so very cruel cut of circumcision that made me shed tears, bitter tears of pain. And not only me, but with me, cried my mama and dear Joseph. It was the cut of my human will that I wanted to make, so that creatures might let the divine will flow within that cut, and so that a broken will might have life no more, but only mine, which had run within the cut in order to begin its life again. Still little, I wanted to flee to Egypt, a tyrannical and iniquitous, thank you, and a tyrannical and iniquitous will wanted to kill me, symbol of the human will which wants to kill mine. And I fled in order to say to all, flee the human will if you do not want mine to be killed. My whole life was nothing other than the calling of the divine will into the human. In Egypt, I lived like a stranger in the midst of that people, symbol of my will, which they keep as though estranged within their midst, and symbolizing that whoever wants to live in peace and united with my will must live as though estranged from the human will. Otherwise, there will always be war between the two of them. They are two irreconcilable wills. After my exile, I returned to my fatherland, symbol of my will, which after its long exile of centuries upon centuries, will return to its dear fatherland in the midst of the children in order to reign. And as I went through these stages of my life, I kept forming its kingdom within me, and I called it with incessant prayer, with pains and with tears, to come to reign in the midst of creatures. I returned to the fatherland, and I lived hidden and unknown. Oh, how this symbolizes the sorrow of my will, which, while living in the midst of the peoples, lives unknown and hidden. And with my hiddenness, I impetrated that the supreme will be known, that it might receive the homage and the glory which are due to it. There are nothing I did which did not symbolize the sorrow of my will, the conditions in which creatures put it, and a call I made in order to return its kingdom to it. And this is what I want your life to be, the continuous calling of my kingdom into my will, into the midst of creatures. And I'm going to pause there because I thought, as we went about that part, the part which we talked about earlier about how it's happening and it's really not apparent to anything. Nobody really knows what's going on.
Like in his hidden life, you're
Yes,
saying.
yeah.
We didn't.
It's all
know.
going
All
on.
We knew from the presentation until he had his public life was when he was 12. And he was in the temple, speaking with the doctors of the church there of the Jews. Yeah, we knew nothing about his hidden life. Now he's saying,
It explodes.
yeah, he was repairing and doing all
He's
that
busy.
in his hidden, yeah. Just as we did.
Just as we've said, this is all going on. You know, the knowledges that are being shared and spread and everything, and nobody really realizes it until all of a sudden.
Which is the way he wanted it to happen.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Until-
The way he did it,
Right.
the way we're gonna. Now, while I was saying this, my little Jesus came out from within my interior and received the homage of all creation, and to listen to their mute language, and squeezing me to himself, he told me, my daughter, the easiest means in order to hasten the coming of my will upon earth are the knowledges about it. The knowledges bring light and heat and form within themselves the prime act of God, in which the creature finds the first act in which to model her own. If she does not find the first act, the creature does not have the virtue of forming the prime act. Therefore, the acts therefore the acts, the things which are most necessary in order to form this kingdom would be missing. See then what one additional knowledge about my will means. By carrying the prime act of God within themselves, they will bring with them a magnetic force, a powerful magnet, in order to draw creatures to repeat the prime act of God. With this light, they will bring the disillusionment of all human will. With their heat, they will soften the hardest hearts to bend before the divine act, and creatures will feel captivated to wanting to model themselves on this act. Therefore, the more knowledges I manifest about my will, the more quickly is the kingdom of the divine fiat drawn upon earth.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah.
Could have bought it. Now, that's a perfect example in here about how to do like a round of redemption with at Christmas time, and what was going on and what this all represented, he's talking about why he was born at midnight.
Yeah.
All of that, you can walk through that, each of the steps at Christmas and the following things.
Circumcision.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, that was our potpourri category for the day.
Good. Yeah, it's good.
Any final observations or thoughts or understandings? Anybody wants to share?
On this or anything?
I always have trouble verbalizing this, but in the last part of this reading, where it says the knowledges bring light and heat and form the prime act of God within themselves, in which the creature finds the prime act on which to model her own. And I always think back to each of our cynicals. In reading the knowledges, I get more light, or I learn more and I get more
Passionate.
exactly.
And heat.
Yes, and I don't care if you're just starting or if you're in the middle or wherever you are, there's always something to learn and always something to get me excited, in my journey.
Jesus don't have the writing date to draw from. But Jesus told Louisa that Adam, while he had dominion and while he named, all the things that he named, Adam did not have all the knowledges. Adam was going to be learning additional knowledges because there's so many knowledges that they have out there. You have that humans we can't take them all in. So that's such a valid point that you make about learning, continuing to learn and new knowledges. And we will not only continue to learn about the knowledges of the divine will and the kingdom of the divine will when we're on this side of death, but we'll also, there's learning that happens on the other side as well, he tells her. So there's always learning about God's divine will and the king and his kingdom. And so it's you're never there. There's always something coming at you.
And it's like a euphoric feeling too. The words that Bishop Barron used are so pertinent, I think, to once you get it and you Well, you have to want it, but once you have it, it just keeps getting better and better and better, and you see the world in such a different light. And you feel the world in such a different way. I'm sorry, George.
No, nothing to be sorry. I was just gonna say, but only you in this environment can make a difference in the do form.
That's exactly right.
That still intrigues me. I mean,
And the more acts that we either bring to or identify or want to enclose or do enclose, then the more the do fall, those fruits and those goods keep getting
they're
released.
manifested and then they fall.
That's right. Yeah. Basically, they are turned over to God, who uses them however he needs to use them to. My vision is to kind of try to keep mankind like this governed in, like the arms on the Vatican, that keep them in. Although in this day and time, it's more like trying to do this, it feels like sometimes, or the observation is sometimes. Okay, well, thank you for everyone for being here, either online or here in person. Anything anybody on Zoom would like to add before we finish for the day?
I'd like to, John.
Go for it.
I'd like to say the potpourri was beautiful. The readings were great way to start the new year, but I'm going to reflect and go right back to the beginning on Bishop Barron's reflection on the gospel on Cana and take it right to the end of the gospel. Everything we're learning, all the knowledges, do what Mary said, do whatever my son tells you. There's our command. There is our command. And the knowledges, I mean, everything in the book of knowledge, it's all in scripture. No discrepancies.
Yes,
We all do.
no, it
I
all
love that.
holds
I love
hand. That's a great observation and a great perspective to pull from.
And a great mission, do what he
Yes.
tells you.
Yes,
It's all right there.
that's a great point to end on too.
It is.
Good. Thank you for that.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Donna.
You're
Okay.
welcome. Thank you for what you do.
Oh, we love it.
Let's go ahead and wind up by calling down the kingdom. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Descend, O supreme will. Come to reign upon the earth. Descend, O supreme will. Come to reign upon the earth. Descend, O supreme will. Come to reign upon the earth. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, and now at the hour of our death. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. All righty, everybody have a great week. We'll see you next week and look forward to it. For those that found us on YouTube, thanks for staying with us, and we'll look forward to you hearing us again soon. All right. Thank you.